Hello and welcome to the program. I'm David Spears and we're coming to you live from Melbourne tonight. And joining me on the panel, the Professor of Australian Indigenous Studies, Marcia Langton. In Canberra, Australian Federal Police Commissioner, Reece Kershaw. In Hobart, Australian of the Year, Grace Tame. From Parliament House in Canberra, the Minister for Women's Safety, Anne Ruston. And in Adelaide, Shadow Foreign Affairs Minister, Penny Wong. Great to have you all here.
My experience of the legal system as it deals with sexual assault is that it's full of men. And the police, the people in the police and the legal teams haven't had adequate mental health training or training in trauma response. So my question is, when are we going to make reporting a rate a victim-centered experience? And why can't we have more female practitioners to help the victim throughout the entire process?
Now, some states have made a bit of progress on this, I think New South Wales and Queensland in particular. But Grace Tame, let me come to you. How common is this concern expressed about the difficulty in the process of coming forward to make a complaint?
Oh, look, it's so common, so unfortunately common. I, in my role as an advocate, am constantly speaking with survivors who share this same experience, you know, and my own experience when I reported the pedophile to police 11 years ago. I had to make a statement in the room to a man, and there was clearly a lack of trauma information in his training, because every time, and there were a lot of incidents of rape that I had to describe in my experience. And every time that I said, and he raped me, I had to qualify that, and I had to actually stop, and he would ask me, so do you mean that he put his penis in your vagina? And I would have to say that every time. And so I was constantly being interrupted. And as well, you know, just throughout the process beyond that, beyond dealing with the police, it was an experience of feeling like the asymmetries of power mimicked the experience that I had in the actual trauma itself.
And has it improved at all, do you know, since your experience?
As far as I hear from the people that I speak to daily, it hasn't.
Reece Kershaw, we heard from Caitlin in the question there, the need for a victim-centred experience. Is that what victims can really expect these days, in your view?
Yeah, look, from an AFP point of view, I can say that we do train our officers to be victim-centric, and I think we have improved in sharing what's best practice and really understanding the process and explaining the process to victims. And I think that's an ongoing effort. We'll continually learn and understand, and that's one thing that I think law enforcement has been able to do, is listen to victims and understand that different approaches need to be made in relation to addressing those needs. And that's why for us now in sexual assault and domestic violence, the victim often drives the process. What
does that look like, though, in practice, to come to the concerns that Grace just detailed for us there? What does that actually manifest as?
I think it goes back to first response general duties versus the specialist teams. I think the general duties officers now are having to have more training in mental health and other issues, which we're facing a lot of mental health incidents that police attend. But the specialist teams, I know, are the ones that understand this particular crime and the complexities and how difficult and challenging it can be, especially for the victims if their expectations are not met or they feel as though they haven't been respected enough or listened. And I think that's really important that, you know, I'm here tonight to listen and understand. I know that my fellow commissioners are the same. We're always wanting to learn and get better. And I think that's the honest approach that police are taking now, is that we'll accept the criticism and learn from it.
Professor Langton, let me ask you, the difficulty and indeed the trauma involved for some women in coming forward is one reason why they may be hesitant. But you've also been involved in research into why, in particular, a lot of Indigenous women don't come forward. What have you found?
Well, just in response to Caitlin's question, I just want to say a group of us Aboriginal women in this area, working in this area, met just this year online with an Assistant Police Commissioner in the Queensland Police Force and the First Nations police officers who deal with these matters. And I found that a very encouraging experience. They clearly understand the issues, and I just want to say every police force in Australia needs a unit like theirs.
So you're seeing progress there?
I saw progress in that one instance in this unit in Queensland led by an Assistant Police Commissioner, and I'm saying every jurisdiction needs this kind of unit.
From that. But more broadly, your research goes to why Indigenous women are worried about coming forward amidst fears of losing their kids.
Yes, well, there are thousands of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in out-of-home care, precisely because when women, Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander women, make a call to the police for help, it immediately triggers, especially here in Victoria, the child protection authorities who arrive and almost universally conclude that the children are not safe because a woman has asked for help in a family violence or domestic violence or sexual assault case and remove the children. They, at the very least, put the children in a situation of being, substantiated on notice, and they are inevitably removed. And this is why most Aboriginal women now and Torres Strait Islander women will not report family or domestic violence or sexual assault because of the risk of having their children removed. And this, everybody knows that this is the case, and so the perpetrators of violence weaponise this behaviour of the police and the child protection system and hold that over the woman and make her extremely vulnerable to even further violence and also her children. Again, another problem is that women themselves are hysterical if they've been assaulted, sexually assaulted, especially in front of their children, and in cases of extreme violence, because of their trauma, the police arrest them and not the perpetrator. The police believe the perpetrator of the violence and remove the woman, and so now we see skyrocketing rates of Aboriginal women incarcerated in prison precisely because they called in to the police.
But this is appalling. What's the answer to that?
Better police training, First Nations police units like the one that I met online in Brisbane, and I think, frankly, racism is a huge part of the problem. So every social worker in the child protection system just about will conclude that Aboriginal children are at risk and remove them, and there's no triaging of this problem. They don't think, well, what is the risk to removing the children from their mother? So what we find is that it can take women at the minimum 2 years to get their children back. And so the children are in the first instance traumatised by the violence, by the intimate partner. Then they're traumatised by being removed from home. And at a minimum, they will be in out-of-home care for 2 years. And the mother then is, doubly traumatised. She's been assaulted, her children have been removed, and then there's the long struggle to get her children back. So families are falling apart because of the assumption that children are automatically at risk. The authorities need to move women and children to a safe place immediately and not separate children from their mothers.
Reece, Kershaw, let me just come back to you quickly on this. Before becoming AFP Commissioner, you were the Police Commissioner in the Northern Territory. Do you accept what Marcia Langton's talking about here, the need for better training for police on the ground in dealing with these situations?
Yeah, I think we can always improve, but I do know that part of that includes having Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders join the police force, and their pathways now, I know the whole country is working towards having better representation of Aboriginal people in the police force. That's really important to understand the cultural issues. There are deep-seated cultural issues that go on in those Indigenous communities, and the rates of sexual assault and domestic violence is just simply incredible. In one occasion, I can tell you, there was a house that everyone thought there was only 6 people that lived in that house. There was actually 26, and in that house, reciprocal domestic violence orders, a child sex offender. The list went on. Average criminal history was 50 each per person. So the young children growing up in that household had no chance. So we know that there needs to be a lot of work about sharing information from all agencies and working together, and also be better representative of the community that we serve.
The Gatchin's inquiry into whom knew about the Brittany Higgins allegation in the Prime Minister's office has stalled yet again, and the blokey culture continues unabated. So, does the panel think that the upcoming Women's Summit is for real? Or is it yet again another spin-based delay tactic by our Prime Minister? Thank you.
All right, well, there's a bit in this question. Anne Ruston, Minister, I can see, Grace, you've got your hand up there. Did you want to just add something very quickly before I ask the Minister?
Yeah, I find it very interesting that, it's taken this long for them to figure out, or they haven't even figured out still who did what or who knew what when inside Parliament. I mean, get me in there with a lie detector and I'll tell you within a day.
So this is the Gatchin's inquiry, just to let people know, looking at who in the Prime Minister's office knew what about the alleged rape of Brittany Higgins. It's been suspended based on advice from the DPP in the ACT. Anne Ruston, do you think we'll ever find out the answer, though, as to who knew what when? And will this report ever be made public, do you think?
Well, look, thanks, David. In answer to Tony's question around why the report is not, or the investigation is not currently on foot, it is because we have been requested not to undertake any further investigations while the police inquiry is underway, and that's the reason why it is stopped at the moment. But I also wanted to absolutely assure Tony and everybody that's listening, and that is that we are absolutely serious about making sure that this National Safety Summit is able to bring together the culmination of all the consultation around getting the information for the next national plan, because as a government I can absolutely commit that we are serious about changing the dial, not just about continuing to support frontline services, but to actually make a difference by stopping domestic violence, family violence and sexual violence before it starts.
Yeah, we're going to come to the summit, but just to be clear, I appreciate it's been suspended based on a request from, or advice from the DPP, but will it ever be made public, do you think?
Well, obviously we have to wait for Brittany's case to go through the appropriate channels, and when it has done that, then obviously that's the time to have these discussions. But obviously at the moment we're operating under the instruction or the request of the police.
Sorry, Grace.
I just have a question. How can this government seriously claim to care about women's safety and children's safety when it won't even be accountable for and swiftly and directly address the issue of sexism within its own ranks?
Penny Wong, let me bring you in here. You've been pursuing this report, which we're yet to see from the head of the Prime Minister's Department, Phil Gatchins. Do you accept that they are right to pause it on this request from the DPP or not?
Well, first I just want to say thank you to Grace for her extraordinary advocacy, which I think is helping with many other voices to change the country. And thank you, Marcia, for reminding us of so much that needs to be done in our First Nations communities, with our First Nations peoples. Can we just start with why the Gatchin's report was commissioned in the first place? Because I think that goes to the Prime Minister, to Mr Morrison's sincerity. The Gatchin's report was commissioned in the first place because the Prime Minister didn't want to just ask his staff who knew what when. So our issue, and I suspect the issue of many men and women around Australia, is that we had an appalling alleged assault in Parliament House. We had, as Ms Higgins said herself, she felt like she was a political problem to be managed. And instead of the government fronting up and trying to deal with this issue honestly and openly, we had a flurry of inquiries, including one which avoided Mr Morrison having to ask his own staff what they knew. And I do not think that meets the sorts of standards that Tony, in the question, and I think more broadly, as the Australian people want.
Reece Kershaw, I'll just get a quick comment from you on this. Are they right to pause this inquiry in your view or not?
Oh, look, there's two processes. We were very concerned to make sure that the police investigation, there was no problematic intersection or attempt to interfere. And we're able to compile that brief of evidence. It now goes into a prosecution phase, which is the director of DPP in the ACT, and that's on him and his advice. So we were able to complete that investigation in the way that we wanted it to be able to do, which was in what we would call a sterile corridor. Which means stopping this inquiry for now. Well, I think the DPP has made that decision, and,
yes.
and I haven't been consulted or been contacted on that.
So the other part of Tony's question is obviously about the summit. Minister, let me come back to you on this. What are the KPIs? Are there any for this summit? What does it need to achieve?
Well, the summit's most important achievement that it needs to achieve is to bring together a culmination of all the consultation, to put on the stage people who are experts so that the Australian public can have the opportunity to come and have a look at the issues that are confronting those people that are trying to deal with family, domestic and sexual violence in our country at the moment. And so the most important thing, I think, is to hear the voices of everybody who wants to be heard. That's why we've made sure that we're live streaming all the panels that are going to be on Monday and Tuesday. We've now we've got a feedback link on our website so that people can provide information about their views, their thoughts, whether it be about the summit or whether it be about their own experiences. But we want to make sure that we have used every tool that we possibly can to get every Australian the opportunity to be able to have their say about this really important issue.
Yeah, well, Penny Wong, is that enough? Is that what this summit should be about, or do you think there should be a higher ambition?
Well, I think there should be a higher ambition, which is achieving change. And I would hope that it's not just words. We can talk about absolutely wanting to do something or absolutely believing in something, but ultimately the government will be judged on what change ultimately flows from this summit. And I think, my view is, yes, we want the voices of survivors and victims heard. Secondly, we don't just want a to-do list for the states, which is so too, all too often Mr Morrison's, go-to answer, to-do list for someone else. There ought to be a comprehensive response particularly for all the areas for which the Commonwealth has responsibility. And I hope, and I'll defer to Grace and others who have more expertise, but I hope there is a comprehensive response which goes to prevention, early intervention, crisis and recovery. We need a comprehensive response in which the Commonwealth actually steps up to do something.
Grace, Tame, you are going to be involved in this summit. What would you like it to achieve?
Look, I am involved in this summit, and in fact, earlier today, I participated in a roundtable discussion. I was one of 49 people, and I was the only lived experience survivor there. So I think that says something about the prioritisation of survivor voices.
What does it say?
It says that we're not really being prioritised when you think about it. There was also only one man in 49 people there. And it sort of makes you feel like, all right, well, here are these women's issues, so we'll just make the women deal with them by themselves. Also, the summit is on Monday and Tuesday, and it's only been this week that we've received confirmation of how it's all structured. It's all been quite secretive and confusing in the way that it's structured. And although I am a self-proclaimed optimist and I'm acting in good faith, and I really do believe that any step is a good step, but there was a glaring lack in the discussion today, and that is the focus on prevention. So much of this is reactivity. Let's put a Band-Aid on this. Let's respond to this. Where's the prevention? And I mean, I was in this discussion with people from the sector who are experts, who have been working for decades, who, you know, the work has been done. It's there. There are evidence-based solutions, there are evidence-based methods of prevention that are ready to be implemented. It's just a question of political will, really, at this point.
Well, Minister, let me get your response to, I guess, the criticism and concern raised by Grace Tame there.
Well, obviously, I'm concerned about Grace's comments from today, but what I would say is there are a number of roundtables, and all of them have got different purposes to make sure that we can cover such an extraordinary wide range of different issues that domestic and family and sexual violence needs to cover. Because whilst the first plan was very focused around raising awareness and dealing with domestic violence in probably a much more simplified form, this next national plan has to address all of the complexities that domestic violence, family violence and sexual violence occurs in as we're going forward. We also would, I'd say that we have been very, very conscious around making sure we have heard the voices of people who are victim survivors. Monash University is actually holding dedicated roundtables specifically with victim survivors, many of whom have asked not to be named, and many have asked if they can do it in the privacy of a one-on-one conversation with the consultants. We also, I mean, I spoke today with a group of survivors who are participating in the summit on Monday and Tuesday. They've raised a whole heap of really interesting ideas about things that we could do to make sure that the issues that survivors believe need to be embedded in the things that we have to do. And I would go to Penny and say we absolutely do need to move the dial on this. And I pay tribute to the former Prime Minister Julia Gillard when she actually made that really amazing decision to actually put the first plan in place back in 2010. But what we've got now in front of us is an opportunity to build on that work that she put in place in 2010. And you're right, Grace, we absolutely have to make sure that this is not just a talk fest, that things that come out of this summit actually deliver the real change that you're talking about. And that's why we're doing it. But this isn't the end of the conversation about the next plan. This is the end of the consultation, and then we all need to get together and work out, every single person in Australia, about how we are going to collectively and individually make a difference.
The prominent woman asked that men help with the heavy lifting to make changes that bite. Don't leave it all to women. Fine. But in practical terms, what do we do? Trying to gain traction on such things can be like wrestling eels. There's much splashing about, but not much result. So, what practical suggestions are there for the man in the street, please? And what is out there already that maybe we could tap into?
Well, Reece, Kershaw and anyone else who wants to quickly weigh in on this one, what is your advice to men? How can they make a change?
Look, just noting that Dave's from Larrakia country, I would say go and visit my friend Charlie King, who runs the No More campaign, and Charlie's an absolute legend up there, and you can look up his website. He'd love help in his campaign's about educating men, in particular in all communities, and taking action in relation to sporting teams and banning them from games when they've discovered that they have been violent towards their partner, etc., etc. But it goes beyond that, and it's the No More campaign. That's just one practical thing I think you can do. I think then also is to police those conversations that men have when they make inappropriate comments or they make slide comments about women. That's really important that we police that and say that's not appropriate, and that takes some courage, and you may not be liked anymore by that group, but perhaps that's going to change those individuals, and I think that can be a force multiplier within men. I know that we struggle to talk and share openly as men, and we've got to be better at that and say it's not appropriate, it's not right, hey, that's not, not the right thing to say or do. So there's some practical things, and join up some of those organisations, NGOs in particular, who are struggling right now, and I'm sure they'll appreciate your input, and it could even be helping build or a women's shelter or something like that, something practical. So, but if you visit Charlie, he'll help you out.
Grace, did you have any advice to offer?
Oh, look, I'm going to come back to my key point, and then it starts with education. I mean, sexism is not ingrained in us, it's taught. But if we teach kids about respect, about consent, about meaningful values as early as possible, and that is consistent across the nation, you know, in formal and informal education, I think that's where we've got to... That's our best bet for changing cultures.
Penny
on
Wong?
anything.
Yeah, I think what Grace said.
Short and sweet.
No,
no argument
Too easy.
There you go. Minister, how about you?
Look, I think that, you know, everybody in Australia probably needs to just have a think about what they're saying, what they're doing, and the potential impact of those actions or those words on somebody else. And I think if everybody just takes a step back and thinks about that, then hopefully we'll actually start seeing the behaviour change that Grace is talking about. And I'll just quickly give a shout out, you know, to organisations like the Port Adelaide football team, who are using their football players to go into schools to teach the students in schools and using their profile to make sure that they're getting the message out to children about that respectful behaviour, about consent. So I think there is so many things that every Australian could do, and what we seek to do by this next national plan is to give everybody the opportunity to play a role.
Can I just say one thing?
Sure.
Thank you. I think first what Grace said, that sexism is taught. You know, I think that is profoundly important. And the second thing I wanted to say is that I think we are at an extraordinary moment in this country's history, because you know, women like Grace and Brittany Higgins and Chanel Contos and so many others, that next generation of young feminists, of younger women, are saying, we're not copying this anymore. And I think that has caused there's been a national reckoning, which their courage to speak out has demanded of the nation. And, you know, we've got an opportunity here.
Marcia, I want to give you the final word on this. Coming back to Dave's question, what's some advice to men as to what they can do?
Well, I think the advice that Reece gave is right on, because right there in Darwin, you've got the amazing Charlie King and his program No More. I'd love to see No More rolled out right across Australia through all the sporting codes. And I've said so to the sporting codes that I had the opportunity to meet with. But yeah, I have to agree with Grace. Sexism is like racism. People aren't born sexist or racist. They learn it from their social environments. They learn it in their families, in their schools and their workplaces. What is tolerated is, you know, the standard. So we must be intolerant of sexism. We must be intolerant of abuse of women, whether it's verbal or physical or financial or expressed in policy. But the inequities towards women, some of them have come out tonight on this program. But in Australia, such a rich country, why do we have such inequity? How can we, you know, be lecturing people elsewhere in the world about human rights when women don't have equal wages, when First Nations people, women and children are victims of violence at 32 times the rate of other Australians, and there is very little justice for victims of sexual assault, and I think an absolutely inadequate response to the victims, the child victims of sexual assault.
Well, on that note, that is all we have time for, but I would like to thank our panel for a terrific discussion this evening. Marcia Langton, Reece Kershaw, Grace Tame, Anne Ruston and Penny Wong. And thank you for all of your stories and your questions tonight. Next week, Virginia Trioli will be here for a Melbourne Writers' Week special. And on the panel, John Safran, Julia Banks, Tony Armstrong and Rachel Doyle. And I'll see you on Insiders on Sunday. Stay safe. Good night.